All right. Well, thanks for being here with us today. If you're new and we haven't met before, my name is Lou. I'm one of the pastors here. If you can't tell, we're in kind of a period of adjustment, trying to figure out things on the fly. Normally, I'm not sitting down like this, but usually I sit down for the first 4 seconds in this chair, and then I don't come back to it. But we're getting our money's worth. So if you haven't been with us, we're in a series right now called No One's Favorite Bible Verses. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about Bible verses that no one loves. Last week, we said, have you ever realized that there are some verses in the Bible that just pop up in all these really nice places? Verses like, rejoice always, and be anxious about nothing. And they, you'll hear them in weddings. They're on Hallmark cards. You'll pin them on your little Pinterest board or post them on Instagram. They just go so nice. Some of them are poetic and they get the likes and they're great and they're fun. And they're motivated and inspiring. They're great. They're great. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course. But then there are some, and I don't know, if you've never read the Bible, you'll come across some verses that are just out there crazy. There's one, I shared this last week, there's one that says, don't boil a young goat in its mother's milk, right? That is weird. There's another one that says, it's in the book of Proverbs, the guy says, I am more stupid than any man. That's not anybody's life verse, right? And there are some that they sound weird. We don't really know what to do with them. There's another one that says not to cut the hair on the sides of your head. And they're a little bit puzzling, right? And so they're not anyone's favorite. But then there are others that we don't quite talk about because they're challenging. They seem impossible to pull off. And we're not sure what to do with them. And that's what we've been spending some time on in this series. That's what we plan to spend some time on in this series. Like last week, we talked about how one time Jesus told this really influential guy in society, he said, sell everything you have, then come follow me. And look, what do we do with that? Right? That's really hard. Is he telling us now to sell everything we have? Right? And really the heart behind this series, the reason why we're doing this series is personal to me because for a long time, it's verses like this, the challenging ones that we don't like to touch, that really kept me away from church because I felt like, one, I'm not doing that. I like my stuff. And two, no one else is doing it and I don't want to pretend. Right? And if that's what we're supposed to be doing, then it could also it could lead us to the conclusion that all the people who claim to be people of faith, claim to be Christians, are all just playing a game. Or, if you were with us last week, you might have seen that some of these verses, our initial conclusions that we draw when we read some of these verses might be off. And maybe there's more to it than what we read on the surface. And maybe we don't have to be so afraid of these challenging passages. They still might not be your favorite, but at least we don't have to avoid them. And you won't have to feel like you're pretending. And so, like I said, last week we talked about this idea. Jesus said, sell everything you have. And I just felt like that was one of those no one really did. Right? And so as Christians, people of faith, church people, you just kind of read that, skip over it, and pretend he didn't say that because, at the time, I didn't want to give up my Tamagotchi or my Game Boy Color or whatever I had. But really, the idea there in that passage, and you can watch this online, was that there was this man who found his value, his worth to God in the stuff that he had. And in that culture, the more stuff you had, the more it looked like you were in good with God. And so by Jesus telling this guy to get rid of his stuff, he was telling him that his worth is not found in the things that he does. His value is not found in his performance. He was telling us today what we can learn from that is not that like you have to perform and do these crazy radical things like sell all your stuff, but that it's not about what you do. That we said he wants you, not what you can do. And you see how that totally turns the whole idea around. And today we're looking at another one of these passages that really a lot of people might read and just kind of walk away feeling like no one actually does that. We'll jump right into it, right? Here's what Jesus says. He's with some of his closest friends, and here's what he says to them. We call them the disciples, his 12 followers. He says, whoever wants to become great, whoever wants to feel like their life was worth living, to be worthy of a well done, to look back on how they lived with a feeling of satisfaction. If you're after that, Jesus says, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Not super exciting. And in case you aren't totally sure what he meant by that, he continues on and he says, and whoever wants to be first, whoever wants to continue making progress, to rise to the top, must be slave of all. Now, here's like an important cultural piece. When you hear slave, when I hear slave, the idea, most of us think slave in American history, but slavery in the Roman culture was very different. Often you ended up in living a lifestyle of slavery if you had gotten into serious financial trouble and there was nothing you could do but sell yourself into labor. So it's not the same thing, but it's still no picnic, and this is still not anyone's life verse. This is still not super exciting. No one really loves the idea of serving everyone all the time. And if I'm being totally honest with you, I'd read that and be like, okay, that's nice in theory, but no one does that. You know, and if we're gonna group this in with a bunch of other verses, in my mind, it would be grouped in with like, you know, when Jesus said, turn the other cheek, in case you didn't know that was Jesus who said that, like, okay, that's nice. Turn the other cheek, I'm not sure. Or, you know, when he said, if someone asks you to go 1 mile, go 2. Or if someone asks you for your coat, give them your shirt too. You know, this whole idea of turning the other cheek, living for people, it's like, okay, nice, sounds good. Probably makes, you know, might help you be a nicer person, but really is anyone doing that? You know, like when I was in high school, or I guess middle school, depending on your district. When I was in 9th grade, I remember going into school one day, 7:40 in the morning, I'm like still wiping the sleep out of my eye. I've got Pop-Tart crumbs around my mouth, you know. I get to my locker and I hear this guy right next to me and he's having a little debate with someone, something political. I don't remember what he was talking about, but you know, in high school, I was, you know, kind of a scutch, or a little more of a scutch than I am now. If you know what a scutch is, just annoying. And so I just leaned over, none of my business. I lean over and I look at him and I'm like, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. And I just went back to doing what I was doing. 7:40 in the morning, right? He looks at me, he goes, if you don't shut your mouth right now, I'm gonna punch you in the face. And I was like, that escalated quickly. 7:40, you ready to punch me in the face? And so I just said, oh yeah? Well, go ahead. Punch me in the face, right? And I leaned into it just like this. And let me tell you, he rocked my world. And so now I'm sitting here with the big swollen whatever that I asked for, literally. Am I supposed to be like, oh, that's right, Jesus says, catch the other side too. And so maybe that's not the exact idea of serving everyone, but to me it went under this umbrella of who's actually doing this. Who's actually living for the desires of everyone else? What does this look like practically? How do you take this theology outside of the church? What does it look like in traffic? You know, when you're on Montauk Highway and you're coming to the intersection where 231 intersects Montauk Highway, you got to sit there and just let everybody in? You're going to be that person? Is that what Jesus wants us to do? Put everybody before you all the time? Is Jesus really saying here to serve everyone, or simply to be a doormat? Because oftentimes that's the message that we walk away with. And if you've tried this before, and you'll see this in a lot of churches with really well-intentioned people, the application of this passage ends up being, don't have boundaries. Don't have a voice. Don't say no. Be a people pleaser. Say yes all the time. Always be available. In churches, a lot of times you'll see people burn out Because in the name of trying to be a servant, they'll just be asked and asked and asked and asked and asked for more and more and more and more and more. And trying to do the right thing, what Jesus says, with no boundaries, will just be doormats and let people walk all over us. Is this really what Jesus is saying? Because if it is, then we end up in the same place that we ended up last week. Coming to the conclusion that, well, following Jesus is just too high of a mountain to climb. No one actually does it. And those who say they do are just pretending. And maybe you're there right now. Maybe you're like, this is one of the reasons why I can't buy into this, because no one actually listens to Jesus, if this is what he's saying. Or is there something else going on here? Last week, I introduced you to a few things. We call them the tools for tough passages. And this isn't anything like super scholarly or profound. They're just 3 words that all start with the letter C. Actually, it's 4 words. But these could be helpful for you when you come across tough passages like this. The first thing you do when the meaning is unclear, you look to clear passages to help you interpret unclear passages. If you remember, we did that last week. The other thing you can look to, and this might take a little bit of homework, is culture. Is there something in the culture that, remember, this is written about 2,000 years ago, at least, if it's in the New Testament. And so this is a long time ago. Like, there might be something different in culture that's causing us to interpret the passage differently. Or the context. The context. Sometimes we take little sound bites of things that Jesus said to certain people in certain situations. We rip it out and try to apply to everything, and it's impractical. And it causes us to form incorrect conclusions. But if we use these things, it can help us to arrive at a clearer conclusion. So let's take this. If Jesus is saying, let people walk all over you, be a doormat, say yes all the time, always be available, don't have a voice, be a doormat, are there any places where we see Jesus or his followers not doing this? There's places all over the New Testament. One of the best examples, I think, is in the book of Acts. Some of these followers of Jesus, his closest friends, they were asked literally to serve tables, to wait on tables. And they said no, because there were other things that they had to do. We see them setting boundaries. We see them turning people down. In other places, we're told to be strong, to stand firm, to be bold, to contend for certain things, to be steadfast, immovable. It's not the picture of a doormat. And so right away, this initial conclusion of let people walk all over you comes into question when you look at some of the other clearer passages. But if you step back just a little bit at the context of the passage, context, when you're asking what's the context, you're asking what else is happening when this is happening? What else did Jesus say when he said this? You zoom out just a little bit, and we start to see things a little more clearly. Right after Jesus said this, he said, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served." Now, when he says Son of Man, he's talking about himself. Not in an annoying, talk about yourself in the third person kind of way, but he's trying to help his followers understand who he is by connecting who he is with an ancient Old Testament passage. But that's kind of a different story for another time. So he's saying, even I did not come to be served, but to serve, which is a crazy idea if you think about it. This is Jesus talking. And to give my life, his life, as a ransom for many. He's saying, my purpose, the overarching drive, the motive is to serve, to give. And if you look at Jesus and the way he lived with all sorts of boundaries. He told people no all the time. But in everything he did, he was looking to give of himself, not receive. He was looking to serve, but not be served. He wasn't looking to see what he could get out of circumstances. He was looking to see what he could put into it. Not what he could consume, but what he could contribute. That was the overarching theme of his entire life. His whole life, Jesus was looking to give. It was his driving purpose. Or to put it in a more practical way, what you could say is if you were to ask Jesus why? At the root of everything that he did, why would you go there? Why would you say no to that? Why would you do that? Why would you set this boundary? Why would you heal that person and not that person? Why? Eventually, what you would get to is that the answer every single time was that he was serving someone. He never arrived at himself. And this is pretty radical, but this is the idea that Jesus is talking about here. At the heart of everything you do, if you ask why, and you keep asking why, does it end with me or with someone else? Think of it this way, and it's gonna apply to anything. If you're a parent, do you want to be a good parent? Because you want to be a good parent. Because I want to know I was a good parent. That I did my job well. And it sounds good and it's noble, right? But it's very different than asking or being driven. Rather than being driven by the desire to be a good parent, what if you were driven by the desire to give your child a good parent? To provide that for your children? Do you want to be a good husband or a good wife or a good partner or a good friend? For you, right? Like, is it for me? So I can have a gold star on my chore chart, a check next to that box, so that I can look back and say, yep, I did a good job. It sounds noble, but at the end of the day, I am the why. Or do I, out of love for someone else, out of service for someone else, do I want to provide her with a good husband? Do I want to provide him with a good friend? And at the end of the day, and it's so deep, I know it's early to go this deep, but it totally changes the way you approach the situation and also how you feel when you fail. I mean, think about, try this. Especially if you're a parent, try this. Next time you blow it with your kids, like stop and think, okay, am I upset right now because I wanted to be a good parent and I let myself down? It's amazing how shame has the ability to sink its teeth into that. And what then happens is I just continue to beat myself up because I feel like a failure. And research has shown that shame just makes you continue to go the wrong direction. Or when I fail, if my goal is not for me to be the good parent, but for my children to have a good parent, you just watch, recognize, next time you fail, be like, you know what, okay, what does it look like right now to provide my kids with a good mother or a good father? Or you do this at work. When you're asking, what can I give to this situation? Or you do this as a friend, or as a brother or a sister, in whatever relationship you might have, rather than stopping, and because it's subtle, and again, it's so easy to miss, but am I doing this because I'm trying to measure up to some standard for my sake? Or am I in this genuinely to give for the other person? That's what Jesus is talking about here. It's like a posture of the heart. I think the best example I've heard of this, or one of the best examples, is this comedian. His name's Michael Jr., at least he goes by Michael Jr., he probably has a different last name than that. But he's like, I'm a comedian, my job is to get a laugh. And so I tell stories, I make connections, I drop the punchline, my tone of voice, it's all to get a laugh, to get a laugh, to get a laugh. He's like, but during COVID, I really did some reflection about my job. I recognized how down people have been. And I made a change, and that change has changed everything. He's like, rather than seeing my goal as getting a laugh, I decided I wanted to give people an opportunity to laugh. and it changed everything. He's doing the same thing, but there's a shift in motive and in the inner workings of the heart. And that's what Jesus is talking about. He's not saying you can't set boundaries. He's not saying you have to let people walk all over you. He's not saying you have to say yes to everything all the time. It's impossible. And what's ironic is eventually that will get in the way of you serving the people you're responsible to serve the most, like those closest to you. He's talking about an internal shift in the way we see other people, and it makes all the difference. He's not saying be a doormat. He's saying live beyond yourself for something greater. And what I love about Jesus, the way he teaches, like he doesn't threaten with ultimatums. You know, he doesn't just like often he provides a reason for why he's saying what he's saying. And if you look at the context again, zoom out a little bit more, we see what's happening here, why he's telling them to do that. He's with his closest followers, these 12 guys, we call them the disciples, right? And he explains to them, all right, listen, I'm gonna die. And we're gonna go to Jerusalem. It's in Mark chapter 10, you should read it, it's fascinating. He says, we're gonna go to Jerusalem, I'm gonna die. The religious leaders are gonna spit on me, they're gonna mock on me, and 3 days later, they're gonna mock me, and 3 days later, I'm gonna come back. And his followers, like sometimes they get it. Like sometimes they're just, wow, amazing. Other times they're like, wow, not amazing, okay? And this is one of those situations. They're not sure, like what he means. They're so lost at this point. 2 of them respond, and they approach him with a question. This is right after he told them that he's gonna die. They say, teacher, James and John, 2 brothers. Teacher, ready? We want you to do for us whatever we ask. Okay. Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? So they say, let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left in glory. Like when you die, just make sure we have good seats. Like they're calling shotgun, and he's just explained to them he's gonna die brutally. They miss the point completely. And he explains to them, you guys don't get it. He talks about how hard things are gonna be. But then it says when the other 10, because there were 12 of them, when they heard about this, they became angry, indignant with James and John. Why? Because they wanted the same thing. They also wanted that. And Jesus recognizes what's going on here. He calls them together, and it says this. Jesus said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles, that means nations, other countries, their rulers, they lord it over them. And their high officials, literally this word means they're great ones. They exercise authority over them. Like these people, the people in power that you're looking for, the people that you feel like have arrived, the people that have received the greatness that you want, that feeling of being worthy of a well done, looking back on my life, feeling like I did it well. Those people that are looking for it in their powerful positions, you know that, right? And they're like, yeah, that's why we asked for the good seat right next to you. He clarifies this, and he says, if this is how it is with them, he says, not so with you. That's not how we operate. Instead, he says, and here's how we get to when we get to our verse, he says, whoever wants to become great among you, great. That feeling of being worthy of a well done in whatever area of life it is, wherever you are looking for that area of well done. That feeling like you have arrived must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. What he's talking about is this universal desire we all have for acceptance, to be worthy of a well done. It's what he's talking about. It's what that idea of greatness is. James and John, they don't actually need power because they have a lot of things to do and they need people to accomplish it. They want what that position brings. And what Jesus is saying here He's not threatening them like they're all having their fun, but you're not gonna have your fun. What he's saying is, for what they're looking for, they will not find in what they're doing. There is a better way to find what you're looking for. If you're looking for a life that you're gonna end up looking back on favorably, feeling like you did something, feeling like it was worth it, that's found not in what you get, but in what you give. And it sounds crazy, it's countercultural, but it's common sense, really. And you know this. If I were to ask everyone in this room to list the three most influential people in their lives, you would list 3 people that gave, 3 people that served, 3 people that had open hands, not people that were looking to see how much they could accumulate and how high they could rise to the top. Right? And in our society, when we talk about the great ones, we talk about those who made sacrifices, who lived beyond themselves, who lived for something greater, who provided a form of service to people, who showed up to live beyond themselves. And that's what Jesus is saying here. This is where that is found, not in the accumulating of power or of achievement or of performance, but when you dig deep beneath the surface and you ask yourself, why? If it's me, for me and my performance, my resume, my little kingdom, you won't find it there. In another place, this is what Jesus meant when he said, whoever's trying to save their life will end up losing it. But whoever gives their life, loses their life, will find it. And we've all experienced that. The things right now in your life that you look back on the most pride are the things you have given. The people you have invested in, those you've sacrificed for. This is the idea. This is what he's talking about. This is why he says to serve, not as a threat, but because there's a better way. You know, for us as a church, what's amazing is that, think about this, Jesus said he himself came to serve, and he's telling them to follow his example. Let that be the thing that drives you, the good of other people. And his followers would come together, and we have the church, right? The church. A group of people who are all following Jesus' example to serve, to give, to have open hands. It's amazing the reputation that the church has gotten in our culture. We do something every year called the 12 Days of Christmas, and it's a fun thing, but basically it's our way of supporting local businesses and providing something fun to the community. It's like a gift that we give. And one of the first years we did it, my wife was setting things up. She met with one of the shop owners, and she's like, yeah, we're going to be, our church is going to be sponsoring these things. We're going to be giving them out. And the shop owner looked at her and she was like, you're a church though. Aren't we supposed to be giving to you? Like, aren't we supposed to be serving the church? It's backwards. The church is supposed to be known for serving the community. The question that drives us is not, what will this church be like in this community? But what will this community be like with this church in it? We say as a church, our vision is to be a church for people who don't go to church. Not just that we set a room up and an environment for people that aren't typically comfortable in church, though we do that, but also that we are for, like advocates of the people who are not here. We want people in our community to be glad that the church is here, whether they attend it or not, to just know that we're for them in their corner. This is the idea. But it will only happen when the people in the church, all of us, me, begin to ask this question about us in all the relationships in our lives. Not what will my life be like now that he's in it, but what will his life be like now that I'm in it? Not what kind of life will she have, will I have when she marries me, but what kind of life will she have when I marry her? it's flipping it around. And it's not normal, it's countercultural because we live in a culture where we're all trying to accumulate, myself included, right? We're all trying to get more and experiences and things and status and whatever it is for you. But what Jesus would say is what you're looking for is not there. It's in giving that stuff away. So what does it look like for you to begin asking that question on a regular basis? Let's put that verse back up here, the verse that Jesus closed with. I'm going to ask the band to come back up here with my crutches. When we talk about this idea of living beyond yourself, of living with the ultimate motive, the drive to give, I'll warn you, there will be days where you don't want to do it, where it feels heavy. It feels like a requirement for being part of this whole Jesus thing. But when that happens, what I can tell you is that somewhere internally, those words of Jesus, where he said he came not to be served, but to serve, and not to receive, but to give, got flipped around. When practicing your faith feels heavy, it's because somewhere we have bought into the lie that Jesus came to be served and require a lot from everyone. And that's where Christianity and faith and this whole church thing begins to feel heavy. But when we bring ourselves back to that place, or if you don't believe this, when you start to think about the idea, the possibility that Jesus didn't show up to require a lot from everyone, he showed up to give everything to anyone, it has the ability to transform what motivates us internally. And that's when it becomes a little bit easier, a little bit lighter to intentionally live beyond yourself.